Julian Borgia is the well, Julian, you tell us your title, please.
I'm the world affairs editor for The Guardian, based in Washington.
You've been covering nuclear for many years, and I know you're particularly interested in the subject. So I wanted to address these questions to you as someone who's been in the nuclear reporting trenches, so called, and I'll begin very briefly by giving a wrap up of how it is at the moment. So we know that arms control measures have been fraying. Meanwhile, there's a modernization program costing huge amounts of money, I think, in all the nuclear possessor states. And of course, against all this background, we have warnings from Mikhail Gorbachev and George Shultz, who together came almost close to banning nuclear weapons completely or removing nuclear weapons completely. They wanted to, but we've not seen this level of tension since 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I wondered, what your views are on why it's not getting much media coverage. There's not, beyond event reporting. We're not seeing the what I would call the enterprise reporting, the sort of the nitty gritty of what's going on. What do you think the problem is, or maybe it's not a problem?
No, I agree that it is a problem because obviously, alongside climate change, it is one of the two existential threats out there. And so if you think about it in those terms, the amount of coverage it gets is absurdly minimal. I think the main reason is that, there's really nothing to see. There's nothing visual in terms of what does arms control and the breakdown in arms control looks like. It looks like, old guys in suits in hotels. That's, for example, that's what the JCPOA looked like. It was very expensive hotels in Switzerland and Austria, people walking in and out of rooms. And then at the end of it, an agreement that was incredibly complex, dense and complex. But nevertheless, that nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, was seen as a big story in itself. Every time Trump left a arms control agreement or treaty, it was big news. The question is, how do you cover the stuff in between, and how do you continue to convey while giving that coverage, which is very, often, what you're talking about are issues which are A, dense, and B, move at a sort of glacially slow pace. How do you continue to convey the underlying importance of what's at stake? Trump has been quite good box office for arms control because it has been such a disaster for it. Obviously, now we're entering a different period with Biden Biden administration about to start, likely to see almost an immediate extension to the New START. So we're in a kind of fluid period at the moment. And in a way, maybe that will make it harder to cover an issue, where there are so few visuals and so much sort of kinetic action involved.
That leads me to another question, and in some ways you've covered it already, but what advice would you have for a young journalist, covering the so-called nuclear file? Because it's what is it? Is it policy and defense or all kinds of issues. What advice would you have for a young journalist to get her or his stories into print about nuclear related topics?
I think that the two necessities are one, to know the subject in profound detail, and I think there's no other way to do it properly than to be a specialist, because it is technical, and because the small things that change can have huge implications, but you would only be able to identify them if you were a specialist. But on the other side of the coin is you have to be able to write in a way that conveys with everything you do the bigger picture, where the detail that you're reporting on fits into that bigger picture and what its implications are. And that is a feat of the combining of specialization and big picture writing. That in a way is a challenge of every beat reporter, but I think even more so for this beat. And the upside is when you go into that field, you'll find that because it is so deserted, the stories you break will be big stories, and you'll often have stories to yourself.
The next question, and it builds on what you just said, is if you think that lessons have been learned from the failure of the press to challenge bogus claims about nuclear weapons and other WMD in the run-up to the 2003 Iraq War.
Absolutely, yeah. I think everyone has learned those lessons, and almost every bit of reporting, particularly about reporting on the Iran nuclear program, was informed by the disaster of 2002, 2003. I think there is a deep skepticism, in society that is reflected in the work of reporters, and an awareness that when you're reporting, the Iran nuclear program is a good parallel to the Iraq one, in that there is the potential for conflict at the end of it, a very real potential for conflict, if they get this wrong. And I think that it informs every bit of reporting. I mean, it certainly ought to. And I think there is a great skepticism made about claims made by either Israel or the US about Iran, with the knowledge and with the background of having gone through Iraq.
I wanted to just examine the role of media in general, and one question I had was as journalists, we're sort of required to act in the interest of our audiences, in the interest of the public, and it strikes me that we don't seem to be able to inform the public about nuclear risks and dangers in the same way that we can. I used to be an environment reporter, that I could, tell journalists, I would tell my audiences about, toxics in drinking water, for example. Is it simply that the media instrument that we have is incapable of meeting the task? And I'm not talking about advocacy. I'm just talking about, the investment that is required, because we don't seem to understand the risks. We hear, as I said, the elder statesman, talking about, sleepwalking into a nuclear disaster. How can those limits of media, because obviously it is driven by events. How can they be overcome? Is there something like your newspaper is taking on in terms of raising awareness about climate change? Is there some way of addressing nuclear on that basis?
I think the trouble is that they're so very different. The climate change, you can go to places and go and point to something and say, here, this is climate change happening right now. Here are the people that are affected by it. You can see, in these pictures, you can see with these figures how much things are getting worse. Every day, there is a human story about populations affected by climate change. The thing about nuclear proliferation is, by the time something's gone wrong, it's far too late. There's an all or nothing element of the nuclear threat. You see nothing until things are, things have gone catastrophically wrong. That makes it a hard kind of parallel to take. A nuclear reporter will have to have different skills. They're not going to be descriptive. They're going to be far more analytical in terms of what this change here means in terms of the risks we face. What's happening between India and Pakistan in the way that their nuclear weapons are deployed and the way their command and control systems are set up. What are the implications of that to the risks that we around the world face? So come back to that same theme of identifying the details, the small changes, and being able to kind of project those, extrapolate, and talk about analytically what risks those constitute. And just in passing and talking about command and control, something that's come to mind is Command and Control by Eric Schlosser is a fantastic, must-read book to how to tell this story in a compelling way. Now, in a way, it's easier because that's a history book, and the history of it, the near accidents are, terrifying and absolutely fascinating by all the details. But in terms of being able to, to make this issue accessible, suitably, terrifying, because there are so many terrifying elements to it, and what comes out of that book is this awesome power of the nuclear weapon and the very shoddy, sloppy way that the dangers inherent of keeping these stockpiles of nuclear weapons, are pursued. It's and that is the kind of constant shock in reporting on nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation that, for example, throughout the Trump administration, well, it's true in general, but it came home during the Trump administration, that in the US system, the president has sole authority to launch. And, that's why Trump, in a way, was sort of good for nuclear reporting, because, just on that issue alone, his presence in the Oval Office brought home the absurdity of the situation we live in, where one guy who might be completely deranged has the power to wipe us all out.
Reassuring comments. I just wanted to follow not that particular point that you were making, because in a way it contradicts what I wanted to ask you. But how much does secrecy hamper reporting on nuclear weapons related issues?
Well, a lot. Of course, if you can't find out what's going on, you can't report it. On the other hand, the secrecy surrounding it makes it such an interesting subject. Because secrecy is rarely entirely impenetrable. For example, the UK is making plans to introduce a new warhead in the Trident submarine launched deterrent that it has, but it kept the details entirely secret from Parliament, and it was a passing remark by a US official that brought it to light. So it's the nature of the beat that the secrecy makes it makes it hard to do, but it's secrecy that makes it important to do, and it's secrecy that when you are able to find something out makes it big news potentially.
Julian, going back to this sort of defense of the public, this sort of democratization, if you like, of information about security. Do you think that politicians, policymakers are sufficiently forthcoming in terms of providing information about nuclear defense? Or is it a case where they're very happy that the public isn't involved because then they don't have to give up any level of control? And I don't mean over the weapons themselves, but over policy.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that's certainly true in the UK. Where these big decisions have been kind of swathed in secrecy. I mean, each of the nuclear powers has different levels of transparency. The US probably has most. Has most transparency of the nuclear powers. But of course, the details of the nuclear plans could be used for signaling, and so in the case of Russia, they made a big show and tell about their plans, and the challenge is to read through them and figure out how much of it is for real and how much of it is for show. But yeah, I mean, that the lack of transparency again, it's the thing that makes the business hard, but it's the thing that makes the business important. That's why we need nuclear reporters, because it is an issue which is existential for everyone, and yet the details of it are held by a small priesthood,
who we should never trust, I dare say.
Well, yeah, by the nature of the small priesthoods, the questions are, who chose them, and why are you not telling us the truth?
Julian, that was very illuminating. I thank you so much for taking part in this discussion interview, and I hope to see you in person in Vienna one of these days, or I will be in DC one of these days, and
in better times.